Nerd Night, Making the Impossible Possible, Lessons from Apollo.
So who's a space fan? Only a few of you? Okay. Who's a space fan? There we go. Okay, I'll just lean more into the mic. Who can name the NASA program that landed on the moon? Apollo. What was the program before that? Gemini. Yes, you said it correctly. Gemini is the zodiac sign. Gemini is the NASA program. There was a memo. Not kidding. So this talk, we're going to talk about accomplishing the impossible. These are lessons that I learned from knowing about the space program. Okay, so for those of you who were born, not in the 1950s, there was this thing called the space race. There was these people, we called them Soviets, we call them Russians now. They launched this into space. Yes, it was called Sputnik. Anybody knows what that means? It means satellite. It's very original. We were afraid because that meant they could put one of these on any city that they wanted. So yeah, we were sad. Then they launched one of these into space, and we were even more sad. Because Americans, we want to be this at everything. So then this guy in 1961 says, we're going to go to the moon. And by the end of this decade, and he kind of called out and challenged America to go and do that. But why the moon? So he actually got his advisors together and decided what goal is so far out there that their 3-4 year head start won't amount to much. And they all decided that landing a man on the moon is so far above and beyond what anybody can do now that it doesn't really matter that they're way ahead of us. So now we're going to have a demo just to show how hard this is. So you're here. You want to go there. I need my volunteers. Yep. Okay, so you're the Earth. This is the Earth if we don't fix our climate issues. This is the moon. Okay, so here's your tape measure. Hold that. Okay, so these are to scale. How far do you think the golf ball is from? Keep going. Okay, keep going. Okay. You can keep going. Okay, so now hold the tape measure with your right hand and do this. There you go. Okay, so you can let the tape measure go, but don't hurt him. Oh, you got to stay put. Okay, is it Kate? Okay, here is your spaceship. It's a 1 millimeter sphere. It's about 10,000 times too big for this scale, but you are going to fly to the moon. Oh, hold up. So do you know how far it is? It's 250,000 miles. You're going to be going about 25,000 miles an hour. Anybody can divide 25 by 25 and move some zeros. It's 100 hours. It's about 4 days. Okay, go ahead. No, you can go faster. So hold up. So I said it was 4 days. You can't go to the moon. You have to go to where it will be in 4 days. And so quoting Mike Probiglia, so you can be early for quite a bit. You can be on time for but a moment. And then you're late forever. If you're not exactly on time, you're late in another sense of the word. So you guys you're done? Thank you. You grab that stuff? Yep. Yep. So this picture is to scale. I originally wanted to try and have some images to scale, but it's just impossible. It's not. You can't do it because so the Earth's down there and the moon's over to the right. You lose sense. So this is no small step. This is legitimate high-stakes space travel. This indeed was impossible, and we'll go over why it was impossible and what we accomplished to make it possible. And that's kind of the take-home I want you to have, is if something you think is impossible, by approaching it the right way, which what I find most interesting, you can make it possible. So this is the approach I'm going to talk about. These words and thoughts are my own, but all the facts are true as far as I got them right. First step is to take your big thing and break it down to what problems you have. So we want to go there and back. We want to not die. And we want to not get lost. That's pretty much it. Solving those issues is going to be really hard. So we originate some ideas and some solutions, and we have to make materials and maybe master some methods. So first one is going to be not getting lost. How do we do this? Compasses don't work in space. Well, they do. They just don't tell you anything useful. We used a sextant. No shit. 16th century technology in 20th century space travel. We also had to calculate numbers in order to make use of the data the sextant would tell us. This device, or the clip art of this device, a digital calculator, was invented the decade we went to the moon. It was not publicly available until the decade after. Then we had to, then we had to communicate with our astronauts, so radio waves communication. We had no satellite program, we had no global communications. We had to invent that along the way. We needed power, energy for this. So now we're going to talk about not dying. It's pretty easy. So there's things that you need to live, things that will kill you if you have them. So we need food, water, air, and we need to be protected from radiation and too hot, too cold. There's plenty of other stuff out here. I just chose these few to highlight. I also need some energy to power these devices. Next problem is getting to the moon and back. So how you go determines what type of ship you take. So that's going to dictate the design of the rocket. And that's because we don't have one of these yet. We don't have an all-purpose SUV spaceship. Yeah, just fold down the seats, it'll fit. Tie it up on top, it'll be fine. Like, we don't have that. So the first method was to just launch a rocket and land. Yeah, it's called direct descent. So this was what most people wanted to do. If you know Wernher von Braun, he was a huge proponent of this. Problem was you have to put everything on one single big rocket. And so that's kind of hard. So we're like, you know what, if we can't fit it all in one rocket, we'll use two or three. We'll launch them into orbit, put them back together, and then we'll go straight to the moon and just land. And then the third option was not even remotely considered feasible. It was so complex and convoluted that the people who pushed it were ridiculed, and it actually wasn't even brought up to the highest levels until years into the program. This involved going to orbit, and then going from Earth orbit to lunar orbit, then going from lunar orbit down to the surface on a separate vehicle. You leave your spacecraft up in orbit, a couple people get into the smaller spacecraft, they go down, they land, do their thing, then come back up, and then you all come back together on the original spacecraft. If you mess up any one of those steps, some of you die. Oh, I just told you the answer. Anybody know which one we didn't do? So which one did we choose? So we didn't choose this one, obviously, because the rocket to launch it would be insanely large. Wait until I show you the sizes of the Saturn rocket. So smaller rocket, a couple of smaller rockets. We couldn't choose this one because the rocket to land on the moon would be the size of a 6-story building. The problem is if you bring all of your supplies for the way back, you have to slow them down to 0 to land and then speed them back up to 25,000 miles an hour. That takes a lot of fuel. So we went with this method. So this dictates the crafts and vehicles that we're going to take and build, because they didn't exist. So we have a lander, we have a capsule. The problem is rendezvous and docking. So this is a very difficult task. We had no idea, nobody had done this. No human had done this. This is the symbol that I'm going to use for rendezvous and docking. So why is it so hard? Quick foray into orbital mechanics. So any physicists or mathematicians out there? Right, both hands? Yeah. Now cover your ears. I'm going to simplify the hell out of this. And I might say one or two things that aren't exactly correct. Just bear with me. So if you're the yellow guy and trying to go to the red guy, say you're moving in that arrow direction, so counter anti-clockwise if you're British. What direction do you want to go? Or do you want to like accelerate towards it? Who thinks you would accelerate up, like go towards it? If you have something in front of you in space, would you try and fire an engine behind you and go towards it? Right? No, shaking. Oh, some people know. Sure, yeah, sure. Well, if you fire your engine in that direction, you don't go faster. Your orbit goes sideways and you go slower. And now the vehicle will actually pass you. what you have to, so you've already met, if you're here, you've messed up. So you have to here, when you're in lower orbit, you actually have to synchronize your orbits. So you give some thrust, change your orbit so it matches at the exact right time to be on time perfectly. And then so that the other vehicle is in the exact right spot when you get there on the other side of the planet or moon, whatever it is. And then you can fire an engine to turn your elliptical orbit into a circular orbit. Then you guys can dock. Yeah. Yeah. This is why people say it's rocket science. So in the meantime, Kennedy has been shot and killed. Yeah, I know. It's not the first person who's going to die in this story. Really, he's the first person, not the only. So now we've originated our ideas. We have our single test. We have to test all this stuff out because this is brand new. We've never done this before. So we have single tests. We have our rockets, our landers, our craft. We have stuff that we need to live, stuff that will kill us, stuff that to navigate. And then the calendar in the corner there, that's because we don't know how long people can live in space. By this point, the longest we've spent in space is a couple of days. And then, okay, so we get to the Gemini program. And Gemini 1 to 2, so 1964, we're just now testing. And we were trying to get there by 1970, or 69, depending on what by the end of this decade means. So we tested the craft first without people. Gemini 4, so this red, yes. So we tried to rendezvous and dock with the vehicle, but we didn't actually know how to do it. And so what people were thinking, yeah, just accelerate towards the craft. That's what the pilot did. Didn't work. He ended up using about half his fuel and just kept getting farther away, and they had to scrub that aspect of the mission. Gemini 5-7, 5 through 7. These two vehicles, this is the first successful rendezvous in space. So this picture is from Gemini 6 to Gemini 7, I believe. And Gemini 7 here, these guys spent 2 weeks in space in a capsule the size of the front half of a VW Bug, the original Bug. Yeah. Just to see if what happens to people in space. Gemini 8. So this is a picture from Gemini 8 to the target vehicle that they successfully docked with, except there was a problem on their module. So I'm going to be denoting good and bad things over here. So the thruster got stuck, sent them into a spiral. They thought that it was the vehicle they were attached to, so they disengaged from that. It was actually on their vehicle. They're now a smaller craft, so they're spinning faster, faster, faster. This astronaut had to turn off the system that controlled these thrusters, turn on a different system, arrest the spin, save their lives. They had to then abort. You may have heard of him. His name's Neil Armstrong. He will be featured later. Gemini 9 through 11. This is just more Earth porn. They did more stuff. They accomplished more of these tasks. Oh, okay. Gemini 12. So this actually was a very successful mission. They go to rendezvous and dock, and their radar broke. So this astronaut featured here. This is actually the first space selfie, by the way. He was able to pull out a sextant and calculate the distance from the craft using the angle of the horizon in the craft, and then do it by hand. He wrote his PhD thesis on rendezvous and docking, which is why he was an astronaut. His name is Buzz Aldrin. He will be featured as well later in the talk. So that was our last flight for Gemini. So we did all of those tests in just under 2 years. Yeah. So so those tests, each mission kind of added something on, tests a different thing. Now we have to add them together. So this is my word. I came up with this called snowball testing. So you guys know the snowball effect, like accumulates, accumulates, accumulates. There's also, you notice, like if you try and roll a snowball down a hill, it might, if the conditions aren't exactly right, it'll just stop. So that's the idea here as well. So it'll build and build and build, and if it's not exactly perfect, the snowball stops, and then you have to figure out what went wrong to keep it going down the hill. So the idea is you keep testing until either you make a mistake, and then you fix it, or you just keep going. That's what the Apollo program was. The Apollo program just built upon all these things that we learned, but we have to start from scratch because it's all brand new hardware. So we have this vehicle. The scale is lost because Florida is flat. So That vehicle, the Saturn V, this picture is at an angle, but it's to scale. The UMISH tower comes up barely 2/3 of the way on the Saturn V. We launched a building into space. Now look at that photo. The building behind it could fit 4 Empire State Buildings inside of it by volume. So Apollo 1, so this is not meant to be a flown mission. This is testing the vehicle and all of the systems. They died. Turns out if you put a lot of stuff in a full oxygen environment, it's very flammable. So this halted the program. This was very detrimental to the whole momentum. So we had to stop and figure out and work on these issues. And people were questioning whether we should even do this, but they moved forward. So we had Apollo 2 through 6. These were unmanned missions. It's not because of Apollo 1. They were planned to be uncrewed. We were testing the vehicle. And so we figured out those issues, move on to Apollo 7. We plan to launch people into space, or people on Apollo. Apollo 7 accomplished all their mission objectives. They had the first televised program from space, live broadcast. In the meantime, more people died. I'm just trying to anchor what happened in history. So Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, thank you. They were assassinated. We now have Apollo 8, and we plan. So the rover, the lunar lander, is late, and so we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. We can't test it. We're halting the program. Our snowball's stuck. So we decided, let's just send everybody to the moon without a lander, just to lap around it. A lot of scientists actually promoted this because they're like, this is very helpful. We'll get a lot of data, and we can also figure out all of the math and all the flight trajectories and everything. So we did this in December 1968. One of my favorite quotes to the astronauts is, "You saved 1968," because of how tumultuous a year it was. This is a photograph from that mission. It's called Earthrise. I like it. Apollo 9. So the lunar lander is now ready. Grumman finally delivered. And we test it in Earth orbit. So we simulate a lunar lander in Earth orbit. They didn't land anything. They just tested the engines. They tested some staging. And they also had to separate the craft because it uses a different engine to land than it does to take off. So now we're at Apollo 10. And if you've been paying attention to the little check bars on the side, they're all green. So are we good to go? It's May 1969. Should we go land people on the moon? Are we ready? Yeah? No? Which one is the first one to land on the moon? 11. Yeah. So 10 was slated as a dress rehearsal. We went there with everything to land on the moon and didn't, just to test all the procedures. Separate the craft. They descended down to 10 nautical miles, roughly the flight of a cruising jetliner, a passenger jet, and then separated the craft, and then re-rendezvoused with the capsule. Remember, we failed the first few rendezvous and docking. Now we're hedging the lives of these astronauts on rendezvous and docking in order to get them back. So after all of our snowball testing, we now can implement it. And this brings us to Apollo 11. Yeah, we did it. So I'm not going to spend much time on this because I feel like everything is talking about Apollo 11, and they kind of skip over that we kept going. So I'm going to talk more about that. But the one cool thing is, did you know they almost died? So, oh, good. So when they were moving around and getting the spacesuits on, they bumped a switch and it broke, and that switch was important for getting back off. So they tell NASA, and it's like, we'll figure it out in the morning. They go to sleep and then wake up, and NASA didn't have a solution. So Aldrin's like, I'll just shove my pen in here and see if this works. It did. So now that we did the thing, we're going to build upon it. So we're going to figure out what we didn't do as well and what can we improve. So where'd they land again? The moon? Yeah, where? Yeah, so Tranquility. During that time, it was kind of like the first European explorers landing on America. Like, where were you? On the east side? So we couldn't really track them that accurately where they were landing during the process, and we had to use, I assume it was celestial navigation, after they landed, but we couldn't really track them live. So we wanted to improve and do a precision landing. So I'm going to denote that by a bullseye. So that's the target of the next mission. So that's Apollo 12. This one so during launch, 30 seconds into it, anybody know what happens? Yeah, we got struck by lightning. 20 seconds later, again, everything turned off. Yeah. Somebody knew what they were doing, and they're like, hey, hit the switch. Nobody knew what that switch was, and except for, not Bill Anders, Alan Bean. He's like, oh, I know that switch. Boop. Everything turns back on. Keep going. And they had a precision landing. These guys were also, I think, the first astronauts to be punked. The people who set up their checklists put porn in their checklists. Not kidding. So now we're going to keep lapping. We're going to keep improving. There's more. There's a dick pic on the moon, but that's a whole other story. So now we're going to lap and keep doing these missions. The dick pic is Andy Warhol's signature. So there was a little ceramic gift that they landed on the moon. Andy Warhol signed his name. So it's Andy Warhol. So Apollo 13, there was a movie. You may have heard of it. It was good. There was an explosion. They did not die. Oh, and so the Apollo 1 fire, the process to fireproof the capsule actually inadvertently waterproofed the electronics. Anybody who's seen the movie or read about it knows that the capsule was filled with condensation when they were coming back. So this, we don't know for sure, but we're very likely the Apollo 1 fire, what we did to fix that actually saved the lives of the astronauts in Apollo 13. So it kind of all builds on itself. Apollo 14, so there was a glitch, a short circuit in the lunar lander. And this was not a problem when they were flying in orbit, but if they tried to descend, then the lander would eject them into space and they would probably die. So we figured out before it became a problem, and we didn't have a hardware solution because we couldn't fix it, so we had to come up with a software solution. So they woke up a computer programmer at 1 in the morning, like, hey, we got to fix this thing. By the way, you have 2 hours. Go. He did. His name was Don Iles, and Rolling Stone did a feature on him. So Apollo 15. Now we're moving into real exploratory territory. So they brought a car into space to drive on the moon. They lived there for 3 days, but that's not important because this is. It was an all U of M crew. Yeah. I found that out 3 days ago and just had to add it last minute. Apollo 16 and 17. We keep doing this. This is why it's kind of frustrating that Apollo 11 gets all the credit, because we just kept going and got better and better, living, working, driving, and sleeping for days on the moon. This is Harrison Schmitt, or Jack Schmitt. He is the first scientist astronaut. And this is the blue marble, the last photograph of Earth taken by humans with the perspective of like the whole Earth. So astronauts currently can only see a portion. This is the last time that astronauts got to see the entirety of our planet. So now we can examine what we learned, what we experienced, what it means, what was the point. To me, this is one of the most telling photographs. So this is Apollo 11, and we'll give them this one. So it's Neil and Buzz in here, and then we got Earth. And then anybody know the name of the guy who took the photograph? Yeah, great, perfect crowd. So what's the significance of this photograph? Yeah, I'll repeat it. Michael Collins is the only human not in the photo. So yeah, the science is awesome. It's great. We learned a lot. We have found the Genesis rock. We learned how the moon formed. We learned all kinds of new stuff. But this, I get tingles. I'm getting tingles now. So in the examine, we came to, this is a quote from Apollo 8, but I think it's fitting in terms of what I just told you. So we came to explore the moon, and what we discovered was the Earth. And I like to add, like, indeed, and ourselves, and about us, and why we explore, why we do these things. And so the whole point of this is when somebody says something's impossible, or they tell you that something is possible, or something is impossible that you want to do in your lives, you can think about how to make it possible by approaching it the right way.
This program was recorded on July 18th, 2019 at Live, 102 South 1st Street,